Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's Loren Hawkins again here with another episode of a 3-Point Perspective. Today, I've got the pleasure of welcoming Jay Krushell, Chief Legal Officer of Treefort Technologies, to the show. We've just recently met just a few minutes ago. We had been put in touch with each other through mutual colleagues from Stewart Title. Hey, a pleasure to having you on the show today.
Well, thank you. I am really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah. So tell everybody a little bit about yourself, how you got into the technology side, and then maybe a little refresher of Treefort for those that are not familiar with what you guys do.
Okay, happy to do that. Now, I could talk for hours on this stuff, so feel free to jump in anytime.
Will do.
Loren, you might be disappointed to learn that I'm a lawyer. And I was in private practice in Edmonton at a downtown law firm called Witten. And in my practice, I acted for lenders on commercial loans. So as you'll know the gig, somebody signs a commitment letter, the lender instructs me, I'm the guy who produces the stack of paper, gets everything signed, gets everything registered, reports back to the lender, and then moves the money.
Right.
So how I got into the tech industry was in about 2013, I lost one of my biggest clients. As you know, for lawyers, it takes a lot of work to recruit a lender as a client. You have to build relationships. It takes time, and you have to develop a level of trust. And the reason why I lost this client wasn't because there was any mistakes. It's just that we could not meet their expectations on turnaround times. We were too slow. And so losing a client like that stings. But it was an opportunity for me to take a step back and analyze our business. And what I realized is we had some bottlenecks, some problems, things that were slowing us down. One of the first things was we were doing everything manually. We were producing that stack of paper by pushing the print button on the printer. And so the first company that we started was a company that automates that production of the paper. That company still exists. It's running. It's awesome. But then the other thing that I turned my mind to is that my industry is very competitive, just like a mortgage broker's. Is that there's a lot of lawyers that do exceptionally good work in this. And at least in the segment that I was in, because I would specialize in loans 20 million and under, your standard guarantee mortgage, GSA kind of security. Not that it's commoditized, but it's more standardized. And you can't really compete on price because the market is pretty much set what you can charge for those kinds of transactions.
Yeah. So margins is thin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I had to think of a way how I could up my service levels. So now remember, this was pre-COVID. So this was pretty revolutionary thinking. I said to myself, listen, I have a client, Loren. He wants to move to Edmonton because he thinks Edmonton's awesome. I need him to sign a mortgage and a transfer of land, but he's in Kelowna. And so I wanted to try to figure out a way to meet with my client remotely to sign the documents. And again, revolutionary thinking at the time. To do that, you need three things from a technological perspective. First is a way to meet virtually, like we're doing now.
Yeah.
Second is a way to sign the documents that complies with the rules around witnessing and swearing. And other companies had developed those technologies, so we didn't have to build those. But the thing that didn't exist at the time was a way for me, the lawyer, to verify your identity in compliance with the rules of the Law Society of Alberta. So being totally naive and foolish, we said, hey, let's build that. So we built this little IDV widget, identity verification widget, and we launched the first version of it in September of 2020. And interestingly, what happened then was all three of the big title insurance companies started to talk to us and said, hey, what did you build? What do you got there? And we quickly learned that this little identity verification thing that we had built had value to them as a fraud prevention tool. Because right at that time is when the bad guys started to figure out how to do the mortgage and title frauds. Yeah. So for them, the title insurance companies insure against those types of fraud. So when there is a fraud, they're the ones that write the checks to cover the losses. And prior to that, there was almost no fraud claims. And then it spiked in about 2020. And the title insurance companies kind of hold their cards close to their chest, but they did say repeatedly, publicly, that in that year, that spiked to something around $100 million in payouts, and it was growing exponentially. So for us, they said, hey, this could be very helpful. So for a period of time, we had all 4 title insurance companies as clients. And then in July of 2021, Stewart Title bought us. So they are the majority shareholder of Treefort Technologies.
And that's how I came to finding out about you guys originally from Stewart.
Yeah. And so from that, it's been a really interesting and fun ride. Our business, because Stewart Title is focused on real estate, primarily focused on real estate transactions. We have about 3,500 clients that are primarily lawyers and notaries across the country, some mortgage brokers, some real estate agents, but primarily lawyers and notaries. And so that's kind of the journey of how we got to where we are today.
Well, I mean, it's a lot in a short amount of time, but yet, a lot has kind of gone on in that space. Just not only in what you guys do and what we do, but in the world generally. Like, things have moved very at a high pace, trying to figure things out, especially with the fraud piece.
No, exactly. And you know what's interesting, Loren, just to jump in for a quick second, when we started our business and we launched our product, we said, hey, this is awesome. And our lawyer clients would say, I don't know, this seems strange. I'm concerned about privacy. This is weird. I don't like it. It's different than what I did. Now that's totally different. And I think it's because my guess is if we talked to anybody that was watching this podcast and said, do you know somebody who's been a victim of fraud? My guess is 9 out of 10 hands would come up, whether it's somebody's grandmother, a business, everybody is familiar with this. So we've passed that stage of unfamiliarity where people are now fully aware of the problem and are looking for ways to try to protect themselves.
Exactly. So what's Treefort been working on since the partnership with Stewart? What's that kind of been looking like through that new phase of the partnership?
Okay, so this is again, I apologize in advance for the non-lawyers watching this, but I think it's exceptionally interesting, especially from a legal perspective. So before I give you a specific answer to your question, Loren, the context of all of this is all of the Treefort is an identity verification company.
Yeah.
And
which brokers are very familiar with, because it's part and parcel of their transactions with their clients on a daily basis.
Exactly. And so interestingly, so then everybody will know that all of the processes that regulated entities like mortgage brokers, lenders, lawyers have to do is all prescribed by law. And so to start out, what we did is we built a tool that would allow mortgage brokers, lawyers, and others, when they wanted to verify the identity of their clients virtually. Again, a lot of the times you'd go into a mortgage broker's office or into a lawyer's office, they look at your ID. But let's say you're a mortgage broker in Kelowna, you've got a client in Prince George, and you need to deal with them virtually. In order to do that and comply with the rules, you have to use a tool like ours to do it. So that's what Treefort does. So the initial phase was building the tool that complied with the rules. And then again, this is where it got really interesting, I think. So we did that. But as we journeyed through this process, we discovered a lot of gray areas. We started asking a lot of questions about, okay, well, how does this work and how does that work? And what we discovered is that the governments that pass these laws and the regulators that enforce them didn't know. They didn't have the answers. So basically what this was policy decisions where they're saying, hey, we need to protect people, let's put rules in place. And then they said, essentially, you must use a technology to do this. And with nothing else. And so then people are going, well, what does that mean? Like, what can I use?
The blind leading the blind.
Well, again, but if you think about it, if you've got, say, a lawyer or a mortgage broker who genuinely wants to do the right thing, they want to stop fraud, they want to protect their clients, they want to protect their business. But if you just say to them, use a technology, what are they supposed to do? And so then the second part of our journey, back to your question, was trying to fill in some of those gaps and some of those areas. And that been a very interesting process. So here, I'll give you one example. Maybe this will resonate for your audience. in the dual process method, which is one of the ways that a regulated entity can verify their client, you can go and send a query to a credit bureau. And one of the things you can do is actually access somebody's trade lines, pull them back, and use that information to verify their identity. Easy peasy, sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, the problem with that is we discovered a very large number, perhaps a majority of trade lines in somebody's credit file relate to credit cards. And as soon as you start pulling that data out of the credit bureaus, you get the credit card numbers. And when you get credit card numbers, then you start getting in the PCI requirements. And those are horrifically difficult to comply with. And so that's all to deal with the storage and usage of credit card numbers.
Yeah.
And so the system had been built up to just feed these numbers to us or to anybody who is using these systems. The law allows that.
Yeah.
But nobody had contemplated the situation that if you do that, you could potentially be violating another law. So we stumbled across all of these inconsistencies and gray areas and started asking questions of people. And that's part of the journey that we've been on lately, is helping our clients figure that stuff out. And then the next part, which is I think the most interesting for you and your audience, is the stuff that's coming next that the law doesn't even contemplate. And at the appropriate time in this conversation, we can get into that.
So what enhancements, is Treefort doing in the identity piece?
So, and then, again, it's an interesting question because remembering we're in this box, it's very prescriptive on what you can and you can't do. And so to be completely honest, in Canada, we're a little bit behind other jurisdictions in the world in that there's not many sources that you can query and connect to. And so there's not a lot of new stuff there that you can do. And most of the identity verification vendors are all connected to the same sources. Everybody's kind of doing the same things. But kind of leads into my previous comment. There's technology and society is evolving. And so here's a specific example. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to lead into, I think where you're kind of going, whereas I've understood that there's a new piece, TF, I think, something like that.
Oh, FATF.
FATF. Yeah, and I understand that could have some impact on brokers.
Oh, absolutely. So let's talk about that. So,
sure,
Loren, FATF is the Financial Action Task Force. It's an international organization. Canada is a member country, and what it does at a high level is it basically drafts and produces, let's call them criteria that financial systems need to follow to help reduce the risk of money laundering and terrorist financing. So the requirement to verify your client's identity whenever they're moving money comes out of those requirements.
Okay.
Interestingly, now this is, I think, a storyline that's worthy of a John Grisham novel. And so I'm going to take a minute or two to give a bit of a background to this whole thing.
By all means. The
drama, and then I'll answer your question. So the legislation in Canada that drives all of this is the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, Terrorist Financing Act. It's federal legislation, and its regulations are what govern mortgage brokers. So mortgage brokers, private lenders are all reporting entities under that legislation. And FinTrack is the enforcement agency. So they're the ones that would go and do audits. And so that legislation, I believe, was enacted in 2020, I believe. No, 2000, somewhere right around there. And right around that time, FATF came in and did an audit of Canada. And they basically said, hey, good job, Canada. You're doing okay. But you got one huge problem, the lawyers. Because in the Canadian system, as you know, lawyers move the money on these transactions, and lawyers were not reporting entities under that act. So the federal government said, hey, no problem. We'll just add the lawyers. That started a 15-year legal battle because the law societies immediately jumped up and said, nope, stop. You can't do that. You can't force lawyers to have to submit suspicious transaction reports because it's a fundamental breach of solicitor-client privilege.
Okay.
So they battled all the way up to the Supreme Court. And in 2015, the Supreme Court sided with the lawyers. But they left the door open. Essentially what the Supreme Court said was, listen, federal government, you can't bring lawyers into the regime the way you're proposing to do it, but there might be another way you could do it. So what the people in the law societies have told me they did is they realized we're all on the same team. We all want to stop the bad guys. And they knew because of these international pressures that the federal government had to do something. They had to come back at this. And so the law societies basically implemented for lawyers rules that are equivalent to what mortgage brokers or private lenders have to do. Right. So coming back to your original question, in the last 6 months, FATF has just completed its latest audit of the Canadian AML regime. And the report is expected to be released in September or October. And I don't know, but everybody fully expects that report is going to include a bunch of recommendations. And some of them will be around money handling. Some of them will likely be around identity verification. And it's possible that there could be some increased criticism of lawyers. And so when this report comes out, Loren, everybody's going to be that's interested in this stuff will be reading it and trying to assess the impact that it's going to have on all of us, all of the regulated entities. And it's also it's possible that when that report comes out that the federal government will open up a review of the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, Terrorist Financing Act. So that's going to open the door for a much broader discussion about what this act is going to evolve to. It will certainly mean that the rules will evolve. They may change. I don't know that there will be dramatic change, but there will be pressure for, I think, increased oversight. So more audits of your mortgage brokers and lawyers, for example. There may be more entities that will be brought into the regime. So we're expecting this to open up the door for a very intense discussion about what comes next.
Well, I'm assuming that, one of the key factors is that they're finding that the real estate is high risk and therefore want to, scrutinize a little bit more what's going on within that segment and that. So how can, obviously that's just around the corner. I mean, we're now basically August and, that's not too far off. What can mortgage brokers do to prepare for some possible compliance changes, and or what can they read and advise themselves on with what could be expected in the coming months?
So I know on the legal side, what will happen is the Federation of Law Societies and the law societies who are actively involved in this review will be one of the first recipients of the report. They will digest it. They will put out summaries. My expectation or my assumption would be in the mortgage broker space that the regulators or the associations would do the same. So my thinking or my advice to, say, mortgage brokers specifically is just watch the communications coming from their associations and their regulators. This isn't like, even if there's regulation or recommendations that come out in October, it's going to take a year or more for them to be vetted, public consultation, review.
Exactly.
But it's going to be important, though, I would think. So for us, and if I was a lawyer, if I was a mortgage broker, and I'm planning ahead for my business in the future, trying to think through what it's going to look like, I would pay close attention to this, try to read the tea leaves, see which way it's going, and honestly, I would try to be proactive on this and be a little bit ahead of the curve. Because at the end of the day, here's one thing I'd like to say, Loren. Whenever you introduce something new and there's some friction to it or there's some cost, there's always heavy resistance. Nobody wants to change anything. Nobody wants to make it harder for their clients. But the fact of the matter is doing this protects your clients. It actually is a way to make sure that somebody's not impersonating them, that their money's going where it's supposed to go. So from my perspective, and the reason why I would be proactive on this is I think it's a marketing opportunity. Say, listen, the reason I'm doing this is to protect you. I don't want to be sloppy. I don't want to get into a situation where your personal information is hacked and where your property is sold out or somebody mortgages your property unnecessarily. So again, I kind of beat that drum very loudly because we're really, at the end of the day, what this is all about is protecting our clients.
Oh, absolutely. And really over the last couple of years, mortgage brokers, mortgage agents in the East, they're not unfamiliar with change. I mean, there's been a lot. I mean, Ontario last couple of years. They've gone through licensing changes, enhancing who can be qualified for certain levels of mortgages in the Canadian space. I know Alberta is going through finishing off their changes. From what I can see, it's going to be a little bit of a hybrid between what BC and Ontario is doing, and then you got BC where they're changing up licensing right now. They're going through the whole MSA piece. So another minor change, hopefully, to the brokers across the country won't be something that they're not used to. And again, like you said, a lot of the things that are being done are in the protection of the consumer, which is the most important thing across this landscape, right? So I think it's a key piece for that. Multi-factor. Like, how is Treefort looking at that, and why is that kind of coming to the top of the pile for the standard?
Okay, so I think this is another fascinating aspect. Remembering that the law was written a couple of decades ago in a world almost pre-internet, paper-based workflows, very limited electronic resources, it never really contemplated properly the world that we live in today. Mm-hmm. And here's a specific example. So in the rules, there's essentially 5 ways that, say, a mortgage broker is allowed to verify the identity of their clients. The first is physical proximity meetings. You walk into the mortgage broker's office, client hands the ID, they hold it in their hand. Second is you can use basically a selfie ID technology where you use your phone to take pictures of the ID in your face. Credit file method, digital credential method, we'll talk about that in a bit, and then the dual process method. So coming back to answer your question about multi-factor, let's talk about that first scenario where somebody comes into the office. Well, the reality is these days, with the technologies that are available, the bad guys can manufacture fake identity documents, driver's licenses, provincial ID cards, health cards, even passports that are so good it's unrealistic to expect that any mortgage broker, private lender, lawyer is going to catch it on as being a fake on a visual inspection. So what we've seen, and we know this for a fact because, of course, the title insurance companies see these frauds, is that the bad guys, one of the biggest attack vectors right now is showing up in the office physically with a fake ID that has my photo on it, handing it to the lawyer, and the lawyer goes, yeah, I'm good, check. But it's got your name, address, and date of birth on it, and I'm a bad guy in there mortgaging your house. Right. And so it's just an example about how the rules contemplate just doing one of those methods. And we can go down the list. The credit file method is another one. A few years ago, somebody stole my wallet. I got a call from the police about 6 months later saying they found my ID in some big identity lab. They were printing off multiple copies of these IDs, selling them, blah, blah, blah. So my name, address, date of birth, driver's license number is probably all over the dark web. And so that's all you need to pass the credit file method. That's it. If somebody's got that, they pass. And so, again, the rules when they were written were strong, but with the technology and the advances that the fraud guys have right now, if you just do one of those things, which is what the rules require, you're actually doing nothing to stop fraud. Nothing. Yeah. All you're doing is checking a compliance box. So the title insurance companies are the ones that are kind of driving a lot of this change because remember, they're the ones writing the checks when there's a loss. They've been saying, no, this is not good enough. And so what basically remembering that we're in this box of what we're allowed to do. So when you talk about multi-factor authentication, what we're really talking about is instead of just doing one of those checks, do them all. Right. Because it's much harder for the bad guys to satisfy all of the requirements. It just raises the bar. Doesn't mean that they can't, but it moves the bar from a low level up to a higher level. And so that's really what multi-factor authentication is instead of just doing one check, doing multiple checks to try to confirm someone's identity.
And it's a reason why, the traditional way doesn't work anymore. So therefore, hey, companies like yourself needing to grow that layered security in place for the consumer, right? I mean, we all do our our AML every year. We got to do our training and whatnot, and that's the big piece, right? It's layering. The criminal out there tries to layer as much as possible in a fraudulent transaction, so we can't follow that trail. And what you guys are doing are just doing the same thing, but with checks put in place to catch them up, right? So if we're looking at 5 different ways and they've only covered off 2, there's a good chance in your method you're going to pick up in that extra 3 steps, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I know the conversations we typically have with our clients is when we're talking about, they say, I can identify a fake ID. And the reality is you can't. No human being, unless you're specifically trained and you've got the proper equipment, you really don't have a realistic chance of catching those fake IDs. So even though a system like ours is not perfect, it's still infinitely better and stronger than just looking at a physical ID. And that's what you're trying to do is you want to make sure that you're doing everything you reasonably can. Now, it can't cost $10,000. That's not realistic.
No.
But for a nominal cost to run all of those checks, that's the world that we're trying to create.
At the end of the day, what you are trying to do is say to, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Client or client, we're doing the best that we can to prevent anything from happening to you in this transaction. And like you said, nobody is 100% perfect. No machine, no anything is and will be, right? I mean, you look at AI, how that's kind of coming to the forefront. Well, it's going to get better and better. However, it's not a fail-safe approach to anything. You're always going to have to tweak it. And, that's why I think now, ID verification and enhancements really matters now. As things evolve, we need to evolve with that and trying to lessen the impact.
Yeah, I agree completely. And again, coming back to our original point, even though it creates some friction and hardship for a business like a lawyer's office or a mortgage broker's office where you have to change procedures, maybe you incur a little bit more cost in each transaction. At the end of the day, if we really want to focus on protecting the consumer, it's necessary.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. What type of strategic partnerships have you guys formed within the space within Canada? Like, as far as, have you gone out to other technology companies to use some of their softwares and whatnot to help build your technology?
And this, again, it's very interesting. So there's a number of companies that operate in this space. In the legal space, we're probably the largest or one of the largest. And there's, I think, 2 different business models that are typically followed, Loren. The first business model is build everything yourself. So there's a number of companies who have done that. We've taken a different tact where we have taken the view that it's better for us not to reinvent the wheel. So when we come across a company that does sanction checks and they are experts at it, we connect to that service. And because they're experts, they maintain it, we rely on them. The other thing that does for us, at least, is it gives us the flexibility to pivot if a better technology comes along. And so if we've got a vendor that was really good 3 years ago, but now there's an upstart out of Kelowna that's got a superior product, it allows us to basically plug and play with this model, whereas the other model is a little bit more restrictive because if you've got a technology that you've developed yourself, it's a little bit harder, I think, to change it. So to answer your question, that's our model, is to connect with basically everybody that's out there. And interestingly, Loren, when you talk about strategic partnerships, it's not just the technology companies or the reliable sources like the banks or the telcos. It's also the regulators and the subject matter experts in our world, the land titles offices, because we're all important components of a real estate ecosystem.
Well, everybody's a stakeholder in this. It's not one individual or one company trying to better this space. It's everybody that's working within this channel that is working together as a team, right? So
exactly. And so, for example, in the real estate space, the LTSA is an important player. They set a lot of rules. They have a lot of influence in how the system works. And so we've partnered with them. To your point about building strategic relationships, we're in their marketplace. We meet with them regularly. We don't influence them, but we have conversations with them. We provide information to them. They give us some insight in which direction that they're headed. And those kinds of partnerships, I have found, can be even more important than building an API connection to an AML source. So from our model, what we do is we try to connect with everybody that's reputable and responsible out there. One thing I will say is we tend to focus more on Canadian-based businesses. Part of that is trustworthiness, is people that in our ecosystem that we know and we trust and we, are responsible. But it's also, as soon as you get into that cross-border transfer of data and stuff, then it gets more complicated. If you want to put it that way. So we focus on building those strategic partnerships with entities in Canada. That's our focus.
And to your point, some of those partnerships that you formed that may not be a direct impact on what Treefort does. I do the same thing in my space.
Exactly.
I don't shelter myself. I look to go out and grab a lunch or coffee with another colleague from another lender to understand what they can do and have that, give and take kind of partnership. Because at the end of the day, I'm trying to make the best experience for my broker partner. And if I can't help someone, then I can put somebody in the right direction or point somebody in the right direction. And that's sort of that same sort of idea of, knowing who's in the space that you can rely on or bounce an idea off of, and whether it directly impacts you again at that particular point or not. That's, having those outside partnerships is key to any business.
Agreed. I agree completely.
Right. How has the sort of the ID authentication certification standards developed as well during this last little while?
Again, another fascinating story. So remember, again, the federal government puts out these rules for identity verification and the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, Terrorist Financing Act that basically says, hey, dudes, you got to do this. Yeah. And then a bunch of vendors pop up that do that. And the first question is, say, if you're a mortgage broker and you're looking to hire a service, how do you know who's responsible? How do you know who's reputable? How do you know that the product that they're offering actually does the things that the legislation requires? So there was this gap, to your point. There was no way. I mean, we can come out there and say, hey, we satisfy all the requirements and we do all this stuff.
Yeah.
But again, without some kind of third-party certification, it was very difficult. So two things, to answer your question, basically two things have happened. The first is it's now basically table stakes in our industry that you have a SOC 2 certification or ISO. For those of you that are that might be listening to this that aren't familiar, those are international standards largely based around privacy and security. So a company like Treefort would go through, and let's say there's 200 controls that you have to have in place. We implement those controls, and then a third-party auditor comes in and audits us. And if we have done everything properly, we get a report. So that's one thing. But the gap still was on the identity verification piece. Is your product doing what it's supposed to do? Was a gray zone. And so what happened was there's an entity in Canada based in Vancouver, actually, called the Digital Identification and Authentication Council of Canada. They are a not-for-profit group that consists of government and private sector and subject matter experts that basically developed a standard called the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework, which is basically another set of criteria that is specific to identity verification. So again, coming back to specifically answer your question, how it has evolved is companies like ours are now going through the DIAC certification process and earning their trust mark. So now when we're selling our product to mortgage brokers or lawyers and people legitimately ask us the question, how do we know you do what you say you do? We can say, listen, we've been audited by a independent third-party auditor through the DIAC system. We've earned their trust mark. If you want more information on that, you can contact them. So it's a way to communicate or to develop trust in the ecosystem. So that's kind of the latest iteration of all of this.
And so what do digital credentials, ID, what's that future kind of look like?
The future is now, Loren. So on my phone right now, I have an app from the Alberta government. And that app contains my Alberta healthcare card. So now it's the reality. When I go into the hospital in Alberta, I can hand them this as opposed to the piece of paper. In BC's leading in this because for the long, 4 or 5 years now, you've had the digital person's card. It's going to be rebanded this month. I think they're calling it the BC Digital Services Card. And so I understand that there's about 1.8 million people in BC that are walking around with this credential on their phones. And
I just went through driver's license a week ago or whatever, got it, but it was still the card. I didn't have that digital option, which I wish I did. It's a lot easier.
Yeah, so you can get it. So what's going to happen, to answer your question specifically, in the next year or two, it's going to be a trickle at first, but then there'll be more where people are going to walk into a mortgage broker's office, want to engage that person, and the mortgage broker is going to say, hey, I got to verify your identity. Can I see your ID? And the person's going to present their phone. Yeah. And so that's the next iteration. Interestingly, back to my other story, federal law allows this, but there's a problem. The card that the BC government developed actually doesn't comply with the federal legislation. And so there's working, again, this left hand was doing and the right hand were not talking. So anyways, there's some gray areas and there's some rough edges to be smoothed out here. But certainly what's going to happen is that more and more people are going to get these credentials, and it's going to become the norm eventually for people to be using these government issued credentials to verify their identity. Alberta, again, like I say, we've got healthcare cards. They're already working on the driver's licenses and the provincial ID cards. The Ontario government's had their thing ready to go for a while, but I think for some political headwinds, they've refused or they haven't launched it yet. Quebec passed legislation last fall so that all of the Quebec departments can start developing these credentials. So that's probably the next biggest evolution in the digital ID space in Canada.
So basically that digital card will just sit in your Apple Wallet or Google Wallet or whatever, and it'll be just like any other digital card that you may have, like your bank card, etc.
Yeah, so it'll be very similar. My understanding is the BC government, the way it's coming out right now, and again, I'm not an expert, but everything that I've seen, it's going to exist in a BC wallet or a BC app. And so in Alberta, it's an Alberta app. It could be that eventually it evolves. You know, when you buy concert tickets now and you get them electronically and you put them in your Apple Wallet, it's exactly the same process. But at least in this first iteration of the credentials, they're going to reside in the apps or the wallets that the governments create.
Got it.
Okay, and then maybe over time they'll evolve so you can put them in the Apple or the Android apps. But that's where we're starting.
Got it. So obviously, some of these new developments that are coming, like we've just talked about, will impact the mortgage broker because when they're going to sit down with a new client, they're going through that ID process. They may come across somebody that's already got this digital ID, but how it's going to impact them is we might be behind the eight ball in the industry for how we deal with that type of verification, the paperwork aspect of it.
And that's actually a really interesting point where there's a bit of conflict between the way the technology is being rolled out in practice and let's call it the archaic record keeping requirements under the legislation that envisioned a paper-based system. The two don't fit. It'll evolve and they'll get it there eventually. But what it will almost certainly mean, Loren, is that when somebody comes in with a digital credential, there will have to be a technology on, say, the mortgage broker side so that you can read it. Now, what we're doing is people who are clients of ours will be able to launch a Treefort IDV. We'll do that. We'll connect it. We'll analyze the credential. We'll assess it. And then we produce a report that still satisfies all the record keeping requirements. And so that's, there may be other companies that take different approaches, but that's the approach we're going to take because it, again, satisfies the current laws, but also utilizes the new technologies. It kind of bridges those two.
Yeah, it's that bridge between the like I said, the old and the new, and until the legislation kind of catches up and makes some more changes within the Mortgage Broker Act to adhere to that. So we've kind of talked a lot, what's been going on, what's down the road. Is there anything else that you kind of want to bring to everybody's attention while we're having a chat?
Yeah, I think another thing, again, if I had a room full of mortgage brokers and we were having a conversation, the one thing that I would want to draw to their attention is what's happening in the open banking space. And Loren, have you been following that, or are you aware of what's going on there?
A little bit. That's more my wife's forte.
Yeah. So basically, again, at a high level, and I'm no expert on this, but we pay attention to what's going on, is Canada is behind other nations in what we call open banking.
Yes.
And the federal government in Canada, especially under Carney, has accelerated the legislation. I believe that the regulations are out for review now, so they're moving this forward. So it's more likely than not that open banking, quote unquote, will become a thing in Canada in the next couple of years. And so from an identity verification, well, from a mortgage broker's perspective, what this should mean is it should be much easier for them to get financial information about their clients,
Right.
income, expense, all that kind of stuff. It should make it easier because the system is going to be designed to allow the individual to control their data.
Correct.
And so if I'm dealing with a mortgage broker, you're the mortgage broker, and you ask me for, I don't know, income verification, I can go on my Royal Bank app and allow you to take the information that I have at my bank at RBC and send it to you.
Right.
That's a very high concept, but that's the theory behind it. I have direct access to all that data, and I can control who it's shared with and when. From an identity verification perspective, it's actually could be the most revolutionary thing that we'll see in a little while, because remember I talked about those limitations of all of the existing methods?
Yes.
Well, one thing that it's very hard, it's much harder for a bad guy to do is open up a bank account and operate it for a year like a normal bank account. Mortgage payments going out, utility payments going out, income coming in. Not that it's impossible when they do that, but it's much harder. Yeah. In the open banking world, we envision a scenario again where one of the checks can be is you would get a Treefort IDV request, and you notice would come up on your phone that says, "Hey, Treefort Law would like to access your financial information to verify your identity. Do you consent?" You push yes, and then what happens is the information from your bank account, not your balances. That's not what we're talking about. It's much more controlled, but it would be like, does this person have a bank account? How long has the bank account been around? What are the average number of transactions each month? Yeah. Because if it's 0, that's a warning. So if you have 100 transactions, that's kind of in a normal range. So we get those kind of data so that we can say, oh, well, this person has been fully vetted by a big bank and they're running a bank account. That is a really strong indicator that you are who you say you are. So we're watching that closely, and no one knows yet exactly how this tech is going to work or how it's going to roll out. But it's probably one of the most revolutionary things, both on the income verification side and on the ID side that we're seeing coming down the pipe.
I mean, I'm looking forward to a little bit more looseness, I guess, in a way. And open banking definitely does that. You see it in Europe all the time, and like you said, Canada is definitely behind the game when it comes to that. It's just another tool that the broker will have in protecting their clients' data going forward. So, but hey, I truly appreciate you coming on and sharing this. I know we could probably talk for hours on this, and not saying that we couldn't do a part 2 at some point. But again, I thank you and Treefort for allowing you to come on and talk about the fantastic business you guys have in place, and look forward to maybe a future update once some of these new reports come out later in the year.
So, Loren, thank you for the opportunity. The one thing I'll leave you with is that we believe that all boats rise with the tide. And so if yourself or anybody in your audience has questions, I have a lot of information I can share. It's not a recruitment or a sales pitch. I just believe that if we all are more educated and take steps to, so again, anybody feel free 100%. To reach out to me. I'm happy to have conversations and share information.
Yeah, and we'll have all your contact information. So anybody that's been watching this or watches at a future date, they will know how to get a hold of yourself and or Treefort on that. So again, thank you for your time. Enjoy your afternoon, and we'll catch up with you later down the road.
Yeah, go Oilers.
Thanks, Jay.